Hello everybody, welcome to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. Today I'm breaking down the top 4 of Ka0s 4. This is an online tournament series held by Ka0s, an individual from the cEDH Nexus that I knew when I was basically a moderator on that server, and they've sort of spawned their own thing. They have their own website, which I will link down below, and it's an online tournament series that's played over webcam. It's a really fun experience, and I'm really glad that they keep consistently having these tournaments. This tournament was also sponsored by the cEDH podcast, so you should go check them out as well. Without any further ado, I want to break down the top 4 of this tournament. Some things to note about this tournament: the rounds of Swiss, despite it being a 160 player online tournament, which is a huge tournament, there was actually only 4 rounds of Swiss, so you had to have pretty good breakers to get into that top 16 cut, and they were 75-minute rounds with no turns at the end of those rounds. So it meant that basically 75 minutes hit, whoever was taking the last turn of the game, as soon as their turn was over, the game was done. So definitely a format that is tougher for decks that try to bring the game into a later state, for sure. If you enjoy videos like this, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And if you're feeling extra generous, make sure to check out patreon.com/comedianmtg, where you get perks like your name in the show notes, having themed episodes based around content that you provide, and things like that. Without any further ado, let's break down these lists. In 4th place, we have Zane or Z-Rob piloting Najeela. So this is a variant of Najeela that was sort of brewed up by a number of legacy players who have sort of jumped into cEDH, as well as a number of other people who a lot of people associated with Eminence. Specifically, Zane is the person who did the coding of the software for Eminence's pairing system. So one of the main members of their team, and also just happens to be a pretty good cEDH player, making the top 4 of this event. So this variant of Najeela they call NBC, meaning no bad cards Najeela, and it's a pretty interesting list. Definitely meant to not only access the fact that Najeela is just kind of a powerful 5-color commander that's super accessible in the command zone, but also the fact that it can layer ad nauseam lines into this deck. So as you can see, there's a lot of the standard Najeela stuff, having Derevi and Grim Hireling as outlets to go infinite with Najeela, as well as having ad nauseam lines, things that allow you to go into cards like Underworld Breach, stuff like that. But because these decks are more ad nauseam slanted, you see Nature's Will is out of the list, and we're actually playing Druid's Repository as well. Druid's Repository is definitely something that I was experimenting with a very long time ago when I was also playing a more aggressive ad nause version of Najeela. Because Druid's Repository, it doesn't really matter what your mana base is looking like at the time, it just sort of allows you to keep doing the thing you're trying to do. And also it generates mana for turns in which you're trying to grind out a little bit towards the later game. The point of this list really is to keep the card quality relatively high. So if you see, we're just kind of playing a lot of the best things you can find in 5 colors, including pieces like Tinderwall being the things that can like accelerate you into an early Najeela, playing Esper Sentinel, playing Thassa's Oracle, and the Demonic Consultation combos. Just things that are really trying to push the card quality of your list and keep it accelerated, doing it as fast as possibly can be. If you notice, Intuition and Savines is also in here, so you can do the classic Intuition, Savines, Underworld Breach lines, but also it's really interesting because Savines also works really well with a bunch of the win conditions of Najeela, things like Derevi and Druid's Repository. If they get countered, you can use Savines to actually bring them back onto the battlefield. And there's also ways, if, for example, if Breach is not going to work, you can also do something like grab Savines, Derevi, and something else off of your Intuition pile, and then you're able to bring Derevi back and then go off of the Najeela that way. So there's a lot of interesting layering this version can have. Apart from that, it is just classic Najeela stuff with a really high focus on just sort of optimizing card quality and pushing towards a more aggressive slant for the Najeela archetype. I know in an episode of the Miscast, Drake had actually talked about why specifically Najeela for this archetype, and had mentioned that having access to Deflecting Swat, Fierce Guardianship, and Deadly Rollick really early on in the game ended up being extremely pivotal. And if you look at Najeela's mana cost, it can be cast off a Jeweled Lotus, it can be cast off of a Mana Crypt and a land. So there's a lot of different ways to get Najeela down super, super early, especially with like things like Mana Dorks, like the Hierarchs or Birds of Paradise or Deathrite Shaman. So there's a lot of consistent ways to get this card onto the battlefield really early in the game, and therefore turn on your free interaction and just have a clock, because Najeela does one thing: it is put a clock on the table. Has all these natural 1-card combos. It's a 5-color commander that's super easy to cast, so it's obviously very strong, and you know, building a strong deck around it seems to make a lot of sense. In 3rd place, we have Sick Robot with his Timna Thrasios list. So this one is really interesting because if anyone's been paying attention to Sick Robot over the past what feels like a year, I think it's been at least close to that. It's been a ridiculous amount of time. I believe since like last November, he's been playing some version of Tymna Thrasios Hermit at any major tournament, and Tymna Thrasios Sacred Hermit specifically. This version of this deck is interesting because it's actually not playing Hermit Druid anymore. It's still playing Sacred Guide as basically a creature version of Demonic Consultation. But as you can see here in the creatures, there's no Hermit Druid to be found. Almost completely relying on Consultation lines to win the game. So you have Sacred Guide, you have Demonic Consultation, and you have Tainted Pact as your cards that exile your whole library. And then you have either Thassa's Oracle and Labman as your win conditions, and that's it. There's no Hermit Druid, no milling your library, nothing like that. So it's definitely a more streamlined version of what's been happening with this archetype so far. I find that pretty interesting, that you can just sort of win with what feels like a very minimized win condition package, and the rest of it is just like a lot of really good Tymna Thrasios cards. There's obviously the whole Mana Dork package, having Sylvan Safekeeper to protect your creatures. From what I was hearing in the tournament chat, Biomeds is Familiar was supposed to be a training grounds, and it's something to do with Reed not having one copy of one card that day and playing another. I'm not sure. So if you're looking to build this list, maybe put Training Grounds over Familiar, but this is just the information that I overheard. Then obviously, anytime you're playing this archetype, you get access to Collector Oof. You can also play, I believe they're on, so not on Null Rod or on Stony Sound. So just Oof for that disruptive piece. But, you know, having it easily tutorable makes a lot of sense. It's something you can get on the battlefield relatively easy. Survival here to tutor through your creatures. And as I said, like the rest of the deck is just a lot of that high card quality stuff, right? You just a lot of this really cheap interaction, a lot of these really solid green tutors on top of all of our like non-specific black tutors. There's a really interesting line you can go for in this deck with Yisan, because Yisan basically assembles your entire win condition, which is pretty cool because you get Sacred Guide on 1. And then you get Thassa's Oracle on 2, and then with the Thassa's Oracle trigger on the stack, you obviously exile your library to Sacred Guide. So as long as you have access to a 3 generic, 1 white, 1 green, you can tutor 1 turn, and then next turn win on the stack if anybody's doing anything. So if you have Sacred Guide in the battlefield and Yisan is able to go up to a second verse, that is just an instant speed win that is waiting to hit the table at any time, which is obviously a very strong effect. I've definitely heard Reed talking about this deck before, describing it as you can tell which people have not played against Flash Hulk, which is a really funny comparison, and obviously one that's a little hyperbolic, but it's pretty interesting to see that have a play pattern that people have to play around with this deck, so that's pretty cool. And for those who don't know Sacred Guide, obviously you can see it there on the screen, but you reveal cards from your library until you reveal a white card, put that card into your hand, remove all others from the game, and if you look through this list, this is a Sultai list, basically, except for Sacred Guide. So there are no white cards in this entire deck because you want Sacred Guide to exile your entire library. And it's kind of cool that Tymna, being a commander, can enable you to play this Sultai plus Splash list. And yeah, as I said, the rest of the deck is really just higher card quality stuff, just trying to be a solid Tymna Thrasios deck that also has this really clean consultation lines that can just win you the game. Second place, we have Opal Wave here on Minsk. This is pretty classic Minsk stuff. Nothing too insane if you know anything about Minsk. It's mostly a deck that focuses on getting Minsk out relatively early in the game, then activating its 0 ability, which is basically just a sack outlet in the command zone, and you can have any of the 2 Rectors, so Arena or Academy Rector. Academy Rector will go get you Pattern of Rebirth, which goes and gets you Protean Hulk, and then you assemble certain Protean Hulk piles that basically are like a combination of Karmic Guide, Felidar, Kiki. You either Felidar Kiki for infinite creatures, or there's other cute stuff I know that you can do at instant speed with like Karmic Guide and Safi, Eric's daughter. I don't know all the lines by heart, but basically there are ways where you just like bring these 2 back infinitely, and I think Twin Shot Sniper has something to do with it, which is pretty cool because it's a card I really liked, but I didn't know where it would find a place. And for those who don't know, Arena Rector, when you sack it to Minsk, can go get you Vivian, and Vivian is basically a Planeswalker birthing pod, so you can go up the birthing pod line of, so you sacrifice Minsk, you go get Felidar Guardian, it flickers Vivian, then you sacrifice Felidar Guardian, you go get Karmic Guide, it brings back Felidar, flickers Vivian, you activate Vivian again, getting rid of Felidar, getting Kiki, which copies Karmic, which gives exact the thing, and then you have Kiki Felidar on the battlefield together, and you win the game because that makes infinite creatures. So those are the Minsk lines in general, and as I said, I know the Karmic Safi lines will, I believe, allow you to win at instant speed, unless I'm gravely mistaken, but Minsk's ability is only a sorcery anyways, so that is definitely something to know when piloting the deck. The printing of Vivian was pretty huge for this archetype because it went from having one Rector that wins the game, being Arena Rector, which you also need another creature for, to having both Rectors win the game, because Vivian, just with your 3-drop commander, because it also happens to be the perfect mana cost for this pod line to work, it just ended up working out really well for this archetype. So it's pretty cool that Minsk just allows you to just pop off with this. Apart from that stuff, there's a lot of stuff in the deck that's just about getting creatures onto the battlefield. I love seeing Delayed Blast Fireball. That card is extremely strong, and especially in decks that can take advantage of it, but even in like green decks that don't want to wipe their own board but really want to wipe their opponents, the fact that it is asymmetrical is pretty good for 3 mana. This is like one of the cards that I don't think we're talking about enough, but it is very, very impactful. And there is actual Birthing Pod in this list. Are they on Collector Oof? They're not on Collector Oof. Okay, so this list is just going straight into the I'm going to do the Minsk thing as soon as possible, as opposed to more of a grindier version. Because I know some people will play things like Collector Oof or Rule of Law to try and slow their opponents down, but this version is clearly just trying to do its thing nice and clean. Some spot removal, some tutors, things like that. But the point of the deck is really just to get this Minsk on the battlefield and then put an Arena Rector next to it, or Natural Order one of your creatures, or get a Pattern of Rebirth. All ways to get either Protean, Hulk, or Vivian onto the battlefield and go up your chain and win the game. It's really cool to see this deck doing well. I think it's pretty interesting. I didn't love the deck until the printing of Vivian, but now I kind of think the deck's super cool. And yeah, it's really good against certain pod compositions. So anytime that there's a slower pod, Minsk is really good at taking advantage of that. Obviously, it's a little weak to things like Graveyard Hate, but when it comes to fighting decks like Winota or other stacks decks, or when people are trying to just do a grindy mid-range thing but don't have a lot of answers to creatures, Minsk really thrives in those environments. So I can definitely see, especially scenarios in this one where this tournament was definitely a little more heavy on the ad nauseam strategies than past Ka0s tournaments have been. So I can definitely see something like Minsk being able to sneak in after you see like 2 blue farm decks like counter each other out of a game. Or even just like have non-creature counters be the only thing left over after someone else has attempted a bit of a faster win, and Minsk being able to sneak in and then just steal the win out of nowhere with like basically 1-card creature combos seems like a really efficient way for that deck to just be able to take games. So congratulations to Opal Wave. It's very cool to see this list do really well in this tournament. And the streak is finally over. Blue Farm has won a major cEDH tournament. We were going a really long time with the meme being that Blue Farm can't be the best deck because it has never won a tournament. And here we are with Blue Farm taking down Ka0s 4. This is Tremneck's list. Tremneck, for those who are unaware, is a player who has been playing this deck a lot, and actually top 16 tier 1 con this year. Has put up performances a good amount historically, and this is their version of this deck. Now, some interesting stuff you'll notice, they are on Teferi, Time Raveler, but they're actually not on Displacer Kitten, so Teferi is literally just in there as another Grand Abolisher effect, which is pretty interesting. We have actual Grand Abolisher. Some tech that a lot of Blue Farm players have been playing for a bit now is Sidisi's Faithful. It gets around things like Deafening Silence as far as being able to limit the amount of creature or non-creature spells that are being played in a turn. So it's basically a mono blue sorcery speed bounce spell, but also happens to get around, as I said, these creature or non-creature taxing effects like Mystic Remora, Esper Sentinel, Deafening Silence, things like that. So it's pretty cool to see that tech, and it's actually fetchable off of Ranger Captain Vios, which I always find very entertaining. Grim Hireling there to get you a bunch of marginal value. Obviously very good in decks where you can take advantage of the fact that the treasure is going to start, netting you a ton of advantage. But apart from that, it is a pretty straightforward Blue Farm list. I'm seeing a lot more Blue Farm pilots on Deluge to be able to handle the fact that the meta tends to wax and wane and then end up more on a creature side or go back to more of a turbo side. So I'm definitely seeing more board waves in Blue Farm as of late. But apart from that, there's nothing too insanely unique about this Blue Farm list, but it is a solid deck, and playing some of the best cards in the format in order to win games, right? The fact that you can play like this whole turbo ad nauseum strategy, have super high card quality while you're doing it for a lot of the deck, and also be able to, you know, pivot back to sort of a mid-range plan if your initial attempt to win the game or initial like brunt force into the early game, it doesn't pay off. You have all of these really solid value engines to drag you back into it. Congratulations, Tremnek, on breaking the streak, on getting out of the anti-blue farm streak we've had going on. Congratulations to all the players in Chaos 4. It was a really good tournament. It's a really exciting opportunity to have these webcam tournaments and have them be so consistent, like they're happening every couple months, which is awesome as someone who loves tournament cEDH, to have this consistent tournament scene going on every few months, and to know that, you know, if there aren't any in-paper events happening within a certain amount of time period, to know that these will be happening and pretty consistently is really cool. And I am so excited to see this tournament series evolve from, you know, just a one-off thing that was a part of the cEDH Nexus to its own independent series. And it's a really cool, it's been a really cool experience to be a part of these and be able to participate in a few of them. And yeah, so congratulations to the top 4. I highly suggest, because Ka0s Tournament's Mox Field page has all of the top 16, I highly suggest going through this top 16 and checking out some of these lists, because despite the coolness in the top 4, there's some really unique lists in this top 16. Things to shout out: Tom MTG's brand new Joda the Unifier deck, some other really cool lists throughout this whole thing. So I really do highly suggest people go through here and take a look at some of these decks, because people really brought some unique strategies to this tournament. So it's really awesome to see. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining me on this top 4 breakdown video. And once again, if you like videos like this, please make sure to hit like and subscribe. And if you're feeling extra generous, check out patreon.com/comedianmtg. Until next time, we'll catch you later. Peace.
I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If they wanna go eat, then you know I'm gon' feed them. If you're coming for me, hope you're ready for a demon. I got eyes in the back of my head, I'm seeing. Take me for granted.